Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last session, and for many of us, this is a very important session, which deals with India and the West Asian region. There has often been a remark by our interlocutors from the West Asian region that India should be more proactively engaged with the region. But when we ask them for specifics, generally the specifics are missing. So one can interpret it to say, support me. And that's the proactive involvement of India would be like. But as you also know, that involvement of any country away from its borders is a combination of factors, and the first of which is, of course, intensity of interests. There are enough interests for us to be involved in the region, and they have come out repeatedly, so I don't have to tell you again. But also a function of leverages that a country enjoys, the capabilities a country has in getting involved, dependencies or compulsions that a country has in involving or staying away, political will, distances from your shores, and of course the international opinion. This international opinion is more important for some countries than the others, but the underlying fact is that we have interest in the region and we have no safe missions and no clear-cut exit strategies from the region. We also can't take sides in intra-regional conflicts. So to take this discussion forward, I would first invite our guest speakers from Yemen, Ambassador Wahishi, who has been Arab League's representative in Delhi for a long time, and then of course Dr. Torkhajani as president of IPIES Tehran, to give to us as to what do they expect India to do and how would they like India to be involved in the region. And thereafter, I'd request Joint Secretary West Asia and North Africa, Mr. Sandeep Kumar, Professor Gulshan Detal, and Professor Pasha to share their views with us. So to start the proceedings, may I request Ambassador Wahishi to make his viewpoint to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and very good afternoon to everybody. I'm happy to take part in this panel on the relation of India with our region and our countries, which is very close to my heart. And the more happy also to speak when there are such outstanding professors with us from a prestigious JNU and also the WUNA division, who always guided me when I was working here to make our efforts for bringing both of our region together from the side of the Ministry of External Affairs easier and possible and fruitful. I will not take much of the time speaking about the history, but for India, which has an ancient history, and also our region, very quickly we must emphasize that there was a long history of relation between the countries of our region and India. Goes to thousands of years, because some Mominites, if I pronounce the word correctly, which are there in Egypt, I mean of the Pharaohite civilization, also found similar ones here, which shows that there was this connection of using such techniques for the those who pass away and how they keep the bodies and this thing, and many other evidence. But also, I mean, from the point of view of advocating democracy worldwide, as it brings good governance and larger participation of the people in every respective country, Uh, Sometimes some people in the region were still, it is a new democracy in our region, would say, I mean, are you bringing some Western values? And always my answer, because there is some sensitivity towards this thing, I say, why you think so? I mean, there is in our continent, we are in West Asia, and there is in South Asia, the largest democracy in the world. So, I mean, if we speak about, with the hope to have a, I mean, democracy in this or that country, I mean, this is the example from one and the same region and with the same challenges of development, of education, literacy, and so on and so forth. And how we look in our region to India and the other parts of Asia from West Asia countries, as someone has mentioned that this century, the 21st century, is the Asian century. So we can be proud of that in West Asia and South Asia and the rest of the continent. And it is the biggest continent and most populated, so that I can understand how much is the importance of this for us all. Before going to some, as the chair has requested, ideas on how these relations can be developed, I want to highlight on the recent development in India, where there was a change in handover of power. And even I was asked, I mean, what do you think of these results of the elections and so on? And I want to bring you first-hand information from our region, how we look to these changes in power. I'm sorry for that. Close it completely. Sorry for that. So the answer is that in the Arab region, Arab countries, be it North Africa or West Asia, we have full respect to the choice of the Indian people in the elections. And also because another thing that there was before in the 80s change of power in India. Of course, most of the time there were the Congress since the independence, but in the 80s there was a change of power. And if we look, in spite of all these, I mean, forces which came to power in India, India is maintaining its position and principal position towards the Arab countries, particularly the Palestinian cause, and the records of the UN is a good proof of that. And for all these reasons, I mean, we think that the relation between India and our countries can be good and can develop further, provided that, I mean, more efforts to be done in this respect. Of course, I mean, we have also in the modern history common things that, I mean, India got its independence, and at that time also other countries were inspired to get their independence, many in our region, and we are all finding our way how to build our countries independently. And we know of the very important period we cannot ignore in the relation, in the modern history, at the time of great leaders like Nehru and Nasser, and how they bring both of our regions to work together and hand in hand, be it in the UN or when they established the NAM movement, which was at that time when there were two blocks and might be of some importance. But of course we cannot only rely on political relations, good political relations. There should be something for the mutual interest of both of our people in North Africa, West Asia countries, and India. And some people, they say, I mean, politics does not put food on the table. So that's why there was some thinking in the League of Arab States to see some mechanism of developing the relation. And at that time in 2008, the idea came to establish a forum of cooperation called the Arab-India Forum of Cooperation. And the former Secretary General Amr Musa came and he signed the agreement to establish this forum at that time with Honorable present President Barnam Mukherjee. He was at that time the Minister of External Affairs of India. And this forum maybe still early to evaluate, but it went in a good way. The first meeting was held here in India at that time, simultaneously with the signing of the agreement, and then 2 or 3 meetings, among them one 2 years ago in Emirates, and all these meetings have officials participating in it, but also non-state actors, private sector, and as far I learned, maybe the Joint Secretary of the Warner Division, Mr. Kumar, will highlight more. The coming meeting will be in November here in Delhi, which is a good proof that this mechanism is, there is continuity in it, consistent, and everybody is convinced that it is helping to bring the Arab-India relation closer and stronger. Here I would like to appreciate the role of the chambers of commerce, be it FICCI, which is the main force in this Arab-India Cooperation Forum, but also supported by CII, ASOCHAM, and others. And they were doing from time to time some publication reflecting how much is the size of commercial exchange and economical ties between India and the Arab countries in North Africa and West Asia, which we see that how in the beginning of this century it was about 20 billion US dollars, and now I'm not good in figures, but it has reached up to 200 billion US dollars. And of course, as it has been mentioned yesterday, there are about 7 million Indian expatriates helping in the constructions and building and development of West Asia countries, particularly the GCC countries, and they have their remittance, I mean, about 25 billion to be transferred to India, which is adding to the economy. So such ties are, I mean, very strong and of benefit to all sides. Coming to this part which I mentioned that I would like to come to, in how to see some more steps ahead in bringing these relations closer. So coming to this part, I think India is having good relation with all parties concerned in the region, and with this it can play even bigger and bigger role in the region, mainly in achieving just and lasting peace. And there was sometimes a special envoy of India. The last of them was His Excellency Ambassador Gari Khan, and he made big contribution to follow this matter. And from my view, modest view, I think, and this is a personal opinion, that if India can continue this practice of having a special envoy to the region, will help more to strengthen its presence and follow up to achieve peace and stability in the region, not related only to the Palestinian issue, but all these challenges we have been discussing since yesterday. Of course, from the examples, I think India could be very good as a big country in its relation to follow the soft power in its relation with the region. We are very much influenced by the Indian culture. Its music is popular. The Bollywood productions are very popular in the region, and even when we established the Arab India Cooperation Forum, India hosted a big cultural festival here, where all the Arab countries took part actively. And just to give you one small example, one producer from Chennai, she was looking at most of the cultural performance, and she was able, Indian and Arabs, to bring all the 22 groups of artists from the Arab countries and the Indians, and immerse them in one performance at the end of the cultural week, where you can hardly see any difference. I mean, and you can really realize how much this, I mean, cultural things are integrating. This is one way in soft power. The education. Now many students from the Arab world are studying here, with the reputation of the education in India, that it is prestigious universities. So in the capacity ability building, that will be very important, because they will be, I mean, developing the relations between India and the Arab countries when they go back home. So this educational exchange, and here I would like to appreciate the ICCR role and its office in Cairo, in what they are doing, and in the other Arab countries. Of course, I mean, India has advanced very much in the field of IT, technology, and I mean, even competing with the US and others in this matter, and this will be very useful for us. There is the possibility for also, because we always developing countries in general, and we were suffering from the monopoly on the know-how. And now, thanks to that several developing countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America managed to have their hand on science and technology, they can break this monopoly, and because they were suffering from this monopoly, they know how others are suffering from it, and then break this monopoly and make this technology, be it in medicine or in other fields, available to the other countries, including West Asia countries who are lagging behind. In this, I would like to say that maybe I see it that it can be a fantastic combination between the oil revenue surplus in our region and the highly developed technology in India. And this is, again, mutual benefit. I mean, both sides will be benefiting from this. I mean, the last thing, it was already exhausted in all the previous session, but to cannot ignore it, is that we need also to work together, family, that we are part and parcel of the coalition to combat terrorism, because we need stability, and stability will bring development and prosperity for all of us. I mean, our people and the people here in India. It seems the criticism was very large for what Obama has said, that he has no plans when this ISS threats is there in our region, West Asia, and even to the extent that Zahrawi was coming with the statement that he will open an office in South Asia, I mean, for bringing to extend the terrorist acts, I mean, to other neighboring regions and these things. Of course, I don't think it will be materialized for him, because this is a democratic country, secular and pluralistic, so they will never have a chance, I mean, to or safe haven here, but India can be together with our countries, working with other countries in the international coalition to combat this phenomenon. It needs everybody's effort. And today, in the statement of Obama this morning, I saw it on CNN, he said, no, we will degrade and destroy the ISS and we'll go after it. So they have some commitment, I mean, as a big country, where our countries are cooperating with them and cooperate with India. And maybe I would stop at this level to give chance to the other speakers and in the discussion if there is something we can highlight on more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for your very clear views. May I now request Dr. Tolkajani for his views, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry that I try to be a student of international politics and not someone who makes a policy, and I cannot be a good policy maker. I try to make some of the point based on this, school of thought. I believe some of the things which we have to take into the consideration is that we have to think that theory is replacing history. I think if we look at this angle, possibly we could have a better prediction, not sticking to the history, because history is good as long as you talk about philosophy of history. So for that point, it is very important to think if we want to predict, that would be the way. The second point is there is an argument that nowadays a scholar replaces both diplomat and general. Possibly, I was telling this in my foreign ministry, and then, and the secretary told me, you don't want to replace me. And I said, I don't care about your placement. So what I mean is that really scholars can be helpful in overcoming different, difficulties and problems. Once I had a very short debate with Samuel Huntington in Cyprus, late Samuel Huntington, and said, okay, when you raise this idea of clash of civilization, don't you fear that you're somehow preparing everybody for a war? And said, oh God, no, I'm not that way. But remember, I was always thinking that when he said, clash of civilization between, one civilization, Muslim, the other, non-Muslim. And there was a voice, I don't know who was from India, and said, okay, don't worry, Mr. Huntington. If you are worried about all Muslims to be there, then, Hindu India will be with Israel and also with the West. Don't worry. So I was really a type of scared at that time. I was always thinking, are we really going to be? Iran is going to be a strategic partner of, let's say, Pakistan, and then don't work with India. And always I came to a negative answer. That's really a thing. So the reason I say not to talk about history and all those kind of things is because of this. If we go on that, we are hostage not to take into the consideration the commonalities that we have. The next point, I think, when we talk about our region, we have to really somehow to come to a conclusion whether energy is a commodity or is an instrument of geopolitics. That's very important point. If India, China, and Americans do not decide what they want to do with this economic commodity, and look at it at the geostrategic instrument, there we are in a problem. That's really when it comes to this point. The next point is that one thing is obvious after the Cold War, and that's we do not have bipolar system. But this doesn't mean that we have any defined, international system right now. What does it mean? It means prediction, is very difficult. Uncertainties are very much, everywhere. That's why everybody talks, okay, we didn't know Daesh for, let's say, 2 months ago announced. So this, we have to really come to a type of, in the midst of these uncertainties, how different parts should work together, how Iran and India should work together. Can we have any strategic cooperation, at least theoretically speaking, in the midst of all this? Then if you don't know where things are going, then the competitiveness and all those kind of concepts are, no one really knows. One other concept which is very important, usually when we talk in the strategic way, say, okay, balance versus bandwagon. And I have been thinking, really, could we find a third concept when we talk, for example, Iran and India, how we work together, should we mainly stick to these two type of strategy, or we could have another thing? So that's one. That's it. The other point, which I have been telling everybody, is when it comes to our region, I believe critical way of studying security is very instrumental. Mainly, I have been talking to the Westerners this way because always they say, okay, two things important. It is the security of oil, security of Israel, and security of a status quo, as long as is for security of Israel and security of oil. And no one asks, okay, where is the people of the region? So we should redefine what and who should be secured. It is really the people of region also which should be secured. If human security is good for the West, that cannot work. The people of the region also, they are human beings. So if the economic development is good for the West, why not for the people of here? You know what I'm saying? No one can say, okay, Iranians are second-hand citizens of international society. They should not have this and that because they are Iranian, because they have had revolution. That's that cannot. So I think this new definition, or let's say critical study of security, should be a framework when we talk about the region. Absolutely, if we look at the security of the region at this level and look the people of region also as a human being, then we can overcome Daesh. Then we can overcome any other terrorist group. Because down the road they are human being, and human being is human being. So that's one thing. For sure, I believe region is reshaping and reshuffling. We have been talking since yesterday about regional players. No more really the people in the region are talking about superpowers being able to do whatever they want in the region, and they talk about new thing. Not always this is a promising thing to say, okay, superpower or have no role, and but still, so if we want to think about our future cooperation, we have to take into the consideration that really things are fundamentally changing. Only Israelis have a clear map for the future of the region, and they bring in their border from Iran, Turkey, all to Cyprus, and in Greece, because in Cyprus they think, okay, there has been oil discovery. But other peoples, India, Iran, and others, maybe it's time to think, okay, in what map we are talking about our future cooperation. One other point is that, talking mainly about Iran from Iranian perspective, Iran-US relation, Iran-US relation has had obstacle from the beginning of the revolution. Not always there is a rational. I was in New York as a representative of my institute now, at that, let's say 10 years ago. They told me somebody wants to see you, and he is an American contact point on Baku-Ceyhan pipeline. Then he came to me, I tried to talk to him, okay, and then he came a little bit, mad. And I told him, look, what you do is not rational, economically rational, is not rational politically. But Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, why should not go through Iran? Then he said, look, not in my age, which I'm just like father, nor in your age, which you are like my son. You will not see Baku-Ceyhan pipeline goes through Iran. What do I understand from this? Theoretically speaking, everybody is asking what is the motivation of sanction in general. And there is one school of thought that says motivation of sanction is sadism. Punishment for punishment. If that is the case, no one really can expect very soon this issue to be resolved. Sanction is there. So I believe India, China, everybody has to decide. Having this situation there, and remember, Iran has been there for thousands of years with war and peace, And I like to use the phrase of Richard Fay, who was Iranologist, who died a year ago. He said, okay, Iran is just like a palm tree. When it comes under the pressure, the wind, the thing, it goes right and left, but it still remains palm tree. So I'm hoping that we overcome the problem that is being imposed on Iran. It's been imposed because many of you, know that as long as Iran-Israeli, relation has not been solved, so everything, a new excuse will come. When this guy comes, tell me, okay, not in my life, nor in your life, what do you understand? There is not really a type of rationalism to say, okay. So with this in mind, and remembering that in the region which entirely is under the turmoil and crisis and violence, it is the Iranian people who elected last year a president with 73% of turnout, And so this is the Iran which we have. Again, I say, we hope that we overcome the problems. But assuming that does not happen, Indians, Chinese, whoever, they have to decide how they want to deal with Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Zahrani. I was actually hoping that some practical ideas for use by India would emerge, but fine, you forcefully presented your viewpoint with regard to Iran. That's fine. We'll take that on board. Now, may I request Mr. Sandeep Kumar to give his views, please? Thank you.
Professor, how much time do I have?
10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Take a little longer. I think yours is the most important.
No. I'll stick to my time. Over the course of the last 2 days, we have heard how the region is in a state of flux and uncertainty. And this makes policy analysis and formulation even more challenging. Professor Mustafa, you said that how scholars are today more important than generals and diplomats, and that is precisely so. We fully understand that a situation which is so complex requires a multi-pronged approach. We cannot do it alone, and that's why this whole effort, outreach effort to get out, to reach out to think tanks, to universities, to scholars, so that we can have a consolidated policy formulation at the Ministry of External Affairs. And within that policy formulation, we've been grappling with some of the key questions. How do we tap into those geostrategic shifts in West Asia? And for that, we have to be acutely conscious of what Professor Rumel, you said about our compulsions, our limitations, while of course we need to bring our leverages to the fore. in this, we have to assess the evolving role of the regional powers. And yesterday, the Minister of State did say that now there'll be more of devolution of powers to the regional players. We'll have to see how we maintain our relationship with the regional players. And at the same time, we see what is the shifting role of the external players. And here I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not saying declining role, I'm saying shifting role of the regional players, because we are absolutely convinced that US will continue to be important for regional security and alliances. And this is what the regional players themselves want. And this is more apparent today than at any point in the past. Whether it was with respect to the imminent military strikes in Syria, the current statements we have heard from Obama with respect to strikes on ISIS bases in Iraq and Syria, and general statements earlier that we heard emanating from Manama and various pronouncements from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, etc. And the diplomacy that we see Kerry and Obama doing in that region. We've also seen and heard in papers yesterday about how Russia may be wishing to re-engage with the region, but at the same time there's a question of sustainability. We have heard how China has been going in for a more robust economic thrust. It may not be prepared politically to take on a more overt role, but that may change, and we'll have to assess that for India's own space in the region. We've also, in our policy formulation, we have to be very conscious of the surge of ISIS, the spread of extremism, how it affects us, our core interests. And I'm not going to go into the core interests. We've spent a lot of time defining our core interests of energy, diaspora, trade, security, remittances, etc. But we have to be very careful as to how that plays out. And we have also seen reports of media reports of how there have been drives for recruitment of Indians itself to get into Iraq and Syria, although these have not been confirmed. And then we'll have to also assess what is our short to medium measures for protection and strengthening of our core interests in the region. There could be reasons for diversification, and energy was one that Professor Mustafa, you talked about, security, but other security interests also, and how we could devise institutional durable mechanisms to sustain these. And the question which comes out is also whether institutional societal linkages will gain even more importance as a means of offsetting the unpredictability and uncertainty that we have been talking about. Now, as for emanating from all our discussions and outreach efforts with scholars, etc., I'm just going to outline a few of our policy options that we have been embarking upon. At the outset, I'd like to state what our External Affairs Minister said in our Parliament on 21st of July, that because there has been some degree of apprehension that whether with the new government there will be any change in India's policy with respect to the Arab world, and she said very strongly that there will not be any change in our traditional strong support to the Arab world. Thereafter, in August, there was this India-Arab League symposium, and the former Arab League ambassador talked about our cooperation in various fields, and this was one of our flagship events, which was also a mark of our commitment to the partnership with the Arab League. And again, she said in very strong terms, our External Affairs Minister, that our cooperation with the Arab countries, our commitment to that cooperation is unflinching, and that's the word she used. And she outlined a number of measures that we were undertaking to enhance our bilateral cooperation with the Arab League as an organization and individually with all the 22 countries that constitute the Arab League. But coming to the current conflict and the evolving developments in the region, there is acknowledgement that despite the challenges of what's going on today, India has managed to a large extent to insulate our interest from this negative fallout, that we have managed to progress our bilateral relationship structurally with virtually all countries of the region. And for this, we've had to do some balancing act, delicate balancing act, because there have been divisions within those countries themselves. And here I'm talking about Saudi Arabia versus Iran, or Israel versus Palestine, Saudi Arabia versus Qatar, etc. And so far we have managed to progress our relationships with all these countries. At a larger level, there is consciousness that we will need to respond appropriately to any change in the status quo of the Arab world that may come about. Today we see that the Arab monarchies have introduced minimal changes to sustain their status quo. And while this is helpful for us, for our Indian expatriates, this may not be the case in the future. And we have seen leadership changes in Saudi Arabia and some other countries. And we will have to respond to that appropriately, because we do not control processes and we do not wish to control processes. There is a strong convergence based on our interactions with our interlocutors, our ambassadors within Ministry of External Affairs as well as outside, that our primary national interest is the welfare of our Indian diaspora. And this is also what our Minister of State yesterday stated very clearly. He said, we are not in the business of exporting democracy. The promotion of democratic ideals is important maybe for us, for our global ambitions, for getting a permanent seat in the UN Security Council, but at the same time, there cannot be any assertion of democratic values on countries who may not be prepared for it. And we fully understand that. At the same time, given India's expertise or experience, I would say, in democratic institutions, if requested, we could share our experience in parliamentary democracy, in building democratic institutions in countries in transition, and a lot of these countries have requested us. These include Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, and we should come forward in offering this. This will stand us in good stead. And we fully understand that regional problems require regional solutions, and based on this, we will be offering our capacity building and institution building expertise to these countries. I heard some of the participants here talking about India playing a larger role, having a special envoy for the Middle East, and some countries have specifically even asked for that, Libya, Jordan, Syria, etc., and not just for Israel, Palestine, as we heard, but also in the larger conflict in the region. We need to assess this very carefully, and as I said earlier, fully conscious of what we can do and what we cannot do, what have been the advantages in the past, what have been the outcomes in the past. And one thing I'd like to state very clearly is that we would not wish to create parallel mechanisms where in Israel-Palestine case we saw the Kerry US-led peace, we wanted peace process over the period of 8 months. We wanted to give that a chance. In the current Gaza conflict, we saw Egypt mediating open-ended ceasefire. We support that. We don't wish to create parallel mechanisms, and we do not wish to create any circumstances which would affect our bilateral ties. Coming individually to different countries of the region, so far, our non-prescriptive and non-interference stance has served us well. In Egypt, we have watched closely the unfolding of the political transition roadmap. We have seen the adoption of the new constitution, the holding of the presidential elections, and we are encouraged that the parliamentary elections would be held probably by the end of this year. We would wish to see that to completion, and in private we have been raising these issues with our Egyptian interlocutors, and I see the Egyptian CDA here. We fully recognize that Egypt will continue to be an important regional player. We have traditional, historical, long-term interests with Egypt, and we will continue to maintain that. On Syria, we are conscious that we have limited leverages vis-a-vis the opposition. Our credibility lies in our balanced position. And that's why we were invited to Geneva too. And there our EM made a statement that if India is required to offer any assistance in the ground implementation of any agreement that may be reached between the opposition and the government. We would be willing to consider that. We have supported Syria with respect in terms of that humanitarian crisis, also with the destruction of the chemical weapons. We've also supported some of the neighboring countries, fully conscious of the fact that there's a huge strain on the resources from Syrian refugees. In Libya, we have stakes there. Our companies have $4.5 billion worth of investments in that country. There are 6,000 or so Indians who were trapped in the conflict. So far, we have assisted them in evacuation of about 3,000 Indians with government support. There are some oil interests. In 2012 and 13, we imported about $1.3 billion worth of oil from Libya. And we would wish for a political reconciliation, which would bring the country to some degree of stability. On Israel and Palestine, we have issued various statements. We have expressed concern at the loss of large number of civilian lives. We have welcomed the current ceasefire mediated by Egypt, and we hope that this can be linked to the larger peace process of having a more comprehensive political solution to the Israel-Palestine issue. On Iraq, you would have read in the papers, we have vital concerns there, second largest oil provider. We have currently about 15,000 Indians in Kurdistan. We have evacuated more than 5,000 Indians from Iraq, and we still have about 41 Indians who are held captive in Iraq, and we will take all measures to secure their early release. And in this whole debate about what sort of role India should be playing, how proactive we should be, etc., it's also important to understand that old order neutrality does not necessarily mean absence of decision making, lack of political will, or simply lack of leadership. We have to be conscious of what we do and accordingly calibrate our policy. And our Vice President has said that India may have unlimited interests in the region, but it has limited leverages. And that's what guides us in our policy formulation. And we've seen that whole issue about more powers coming to the regional players. There are some which are emerging, which need to take on greater roles, and we need to build relationships and strengthen our relationships, even though it may require a more delicate balancing act with the regional players first and foremost. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Iraq, and even in the North Africa region, Jordan, etc., which are playing an important role in the resolution of some of these conflict issues. GCC remains important. And at the same time, we also understand, and I said before, that there is a role for external players who will continue to be important, and we need to continue our engagement with the US, despite of the shifting role of US that some of us have perceived. It will continue to remain important, and at the same time, we will have to watch the emerging space, as I said, for Russia and China influence, which would be important for our own positioning. We have seen important fallouts of this conflict with respect to the Shia-Sunni fault lines. We are sure that we should be staying out of these sectarian alliances while remaining prepared for any fundamental backlash coming from the region. And we have to be conscious of the large Muslim population in our own country and how we should not be construed as being sectarian in our approach. We have also talked about in this over the last 2 days the dangerous trends about rising spread of extremism, how this region could be supplanting our neighborhood at the base of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And there have been reports of our own nationals who may be wishing to get into some of these areas, and how these open up possibilities for more intelligence sharing and defense cooperation with the countries of this region. I believe that there is perhaps not adequate understanding of Islam as a religious, socio-cultural and political influence in the region. There needs to be more research on that, and that's why we depend on scholars to be able to guide us in those studies which will be helpful for our own policy formulation. And we have been embarking upon greater economic engagement with the region, which we see as offsetting some of the political unpredictability. We have noted that the regional trade volumes have gone up, and there have been figures which have been quoted, 180 to 200 billion dollars last year. But there still remains considerable untapped potential both for trade and investments. The GCC sovereign wealth funds can provide a huge base for our own companies to tap into funds particularly required for our infrastructure development back home. And we need to come up with a more integrated business approach. There have also been talk about how India needs to develop a look West Asia policy, but perhaps on the lines of a look East policy, in recognition of the importance of the Arab region to us in terms of our various core interests. There has been internal debates on this, and you'll be very willing to consider this appropriately. As a medium to long-term measure, we have been considering reducing dependence on the region through diversification of our energy supplies, even going out to other regions like Latin America, Central Asia, South Asia even, exploring other options like shale, providing economic security for our labor force in the region, etc. At the same time, we need to be realistic that in terms of any contingency, the evacuation of the large number of our Indians in the Gulf region would pose logistic and resource challenges, and that it may not be feasible in all cases, but we would be there to help out to the best that we can. I've just touched upon briefly, and this I'm going to end here, defense and security cooperation. And here the important areas are counterterrorism, intelligence sharing, money laundering, arms smuggling, all these areas which are important and are becoming an increasingly critical element of our ties with the regional countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, etc. And we do understand that considerable space has emerged for us to project our interests and points of view for which there are takers in the region, and there have been various proposals to us which we are processing appropriately. And specific measures for strengthening institutional security mechanisms even outside this whole gamut of events which are currently unfolding. These include having OPVs in Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, regular participation of India in shade meetings, stronger naval presence, and regional cooperation in the Strait of Hormuz for piracy interests, and we have still 7 Indian captives held in Somalia, and for protection of our maritime trade, which would be important. This will, I believe, strengthen our positioning in the region. So I'll end here and be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. I think it was very detailed expositions, official exposition, I must say. And now may I request Professor Gulshan Deetu to share her views with us.
There have been 3 presentations so far, all of them so absolutely brilliant and overarching, and I anticipated just this. I feared that at the end of these presentations, I won't have very much more to add to what would be said. Therefore, I have come prepared to pitch my presentation at the micro level and focus only on one issue. And that one issue is the conflict in Gaza. And I'm going to look at the Indian policy to the region through this prism. The conflict in Gaza started on 8th of July. On 17th of July, Israel launched a ground invasion, and on 16th of August, after 50 odd days, there is an open-ended ceasefire in place. During this long conflict in Gaza, 2,143 Palestinians were killed, most of them civilians, and 66 Israeli soldiers were killed, 5 civilians, 1 Thai national. This is the conflict in Gaza in short. Our policy has evolved through this conflict in a very interesting way. To start with, there were a lot of misconceptions, and people were saying that, see, this is what we expected the new government to do. Why did the people say this? They said it because the External Affairs Ministry's official statement, the first official statement, 8th of July, the conflict begins, 10th of July, Sayyid Akbaruddin gives the official statement. And this official statement says that India is deeply concerned at the heavy airstrikes in Gaza. At the same time, India is alarmed at the cross-border provocations resulting from rocket attacks against targets in some parts of Israel. So deeply concerned at the situation in Gaza, alarmed that some parts of Israel were being attacked by Hamas from Gaza. This more or less set the tone of what was to follow. And what followed was almost taking a cue from what Sayyid Akbaruddin said. On 15th July, the opposition tabled a notice of adjournment motion in the Lok Sabha. That notice of adjournment motion was not acceded to. In the Lok Sabha, the opposition has a very flimsy presentation. So they obviously could not stand the ground. Eventually, there was a walkout, of course, but in between there was a lot of slogan shouting, people rushing to the wells, a lot of heat, a lot of noise, and finally the adjournment. This was on 15th of July in Lok Sabha. The next day, 16th of July, the opposition again took up the same issue in Rajya Sabha. And in Rajya Sabha on 16th of July, the notices again were given that we want to have a discussion on the conflict in Gaza. The Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj did not accede to this. In fact, she asked the chairperson or the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, the Vice President Mr. Hamid Ansari, to delist the listed motion to discuss Gaza. This was Wednesday. And on both sides, the government side and also on opposition side, a lot of rules were cited and a lot of precedents were quoted and a lot of pandemonium went on 16th of July. 3 adjournment motions happened on the same day during the course of this cantankerous discussion, or discussion that should not have taken place according to the government. And Sushma Swaraj said this discussion cannot be allowed and that she had already written to the chairperson Hamid Ansari that the notice for the discussion should be delisted on 3 grounds. The grounds she gave were that we have good diplomatic ties with both the sides, Hamas as well as Israel, and therefore there should be no discourteous reference to any friendly country. Now this is a spacious plea, it just doesn't stand. The second ground on which she did not want the discussion in the Rajya Sabha was that this discussion could have an impact on the fate of 39 hostages being held in Iraq. So should we have waited to take a position on something as serious as the conflict in Gaza till our hostages were freed from Iraq? Diplomacy is keep your options open. Diplomacy is to play with as many balls in the air as you possibly can and as you sometimes have to and should. And the third point on which she asked that discussion should not be permitted in the Rajya Sabha was that frontline role was being played by Hamas. Who should play this role if not Hamas? Norwegian paratroopers? Comes the second day in the Rajya Sabha again, and the first thing happens, Hamid Ansari, the chairperson of the upper house of parliament, the Rajya Sabha, gives his decision. And the decision is that the notices have been properly given and the listed subject cannot now be delisted. Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister, chooses to remain absent on that day. And the decision goes in favor of the opposition. Not only does the decision go in favor of the opposition, but P.J. Kurian, the deputy chairperson of the Rajya Sabha, has something even harsher to say. He said, in my 10 years of experience in Rajya Sabha and 20 years in Lok Sabha, I did not see a single instance when the subject is listed and the minister says she can't come. And now that the opposition had more or less won the battle to have the discussion, they wanted to have the discussion on the same day because the subject was listed the previous day, and if it comes the next day, the first thing should be that you take up the matter the first. Hamid Ansari said that Arun Jaitley had also written a letter to him saying that the discussion may be taken up at a later date. And on this issue, Hamid Ansari conceded the point of the government. The issue was deferred and it was then taken up the next week on 21st of July, Monday. That is the day that our Sandeep Kumarji said that the foreign minister was there, and she said what he was quoting, that the government policy remains the same. We are committed to the Palestinian cause, but at the same time we are going to pursue good relations with Israel. But she did not again permit discussions. There was no way to give the chance for a resolution, and ultimately the opposition walked out of the Rajya Sabha just as it had walked out of the Lok Sabha. This is the story from 10th of July, Akbaruddin's official statement, to 21st of July, Rajya Sabha ends. Now, I have just two more things to say, and here you will see a very conscious, deliberate attempt to swing the pendulum back to where it always has been. 21st July, the Rajya Sabha disperses. 22nd July, in New York, our permanent representative to the United Nations, Ashok Mukherjee makes a general statement, and this general statement has two very crucial sentences. One is, India has consistently held that the blockade of Gaza that adversely affects essential services, economic activities and infrastructure development must be lifted. This is a very important statement that our permanent representative is making, because lifting of Gaza is the demand that Hamas has always held, and that has been the condition on which they wanted a ceasefire to be agreed to in Gaza. This was the first thing that Ashok Mukherjee said in New York. The second thing he said was, we reiterate that the blockade and the issue of increasing settlement activities need to be addressed to take forward the peace process and mutually acceptable political issue of increasing settlement activities. So here he is criticizing, together with most of the world leaders, that Israel is appropriating the occupied Palestinian land and building illegal settlements on the Palestinian land, and this must stop. This is a complete departure, as I see it, from what was happening in the parliament earlier. The very next day, something even more important happens, and this happens in Vienna. At the United Nations Human Rights Council, India votes for the bill, and this bill or this resolution says that an independent international commission of inquiry to be appointed by the President of the Human Rights Council to investigate all violations of international humanitarian law and international humanitarian rights law in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, be sent and the investigation be held. Nothing will come out of this. Israel will not cooperate. There will be no such, no investigation and no results and no outcome, but we went along and we voted for this resolution, which again tells you that we are following a consistent policy that we have always followed on the Israel-Palestine issue. The question I raise, in fact not the question, by way of conclusions, I would like to ask three questions and leave it at that. The first question that comes to my mind is, why this such a stark inconsistency in our government's approach to the same issue inside the country and a very different approach outside the country? What explains this inconsistency? What explains this 180-degree kind of a turnaround? Is it that there was a gentle rap on the knuckles and therefore there was a course correction? This is the first question. The second question that comes to my mind is, if there is such an inconsistent behavior, then are there two pipers playing two distinctly different tunes? One is playing the tune as a background score inside the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and the second piper playing the tune in Vienna and in New York. And the third and the final and the shortest question that comes to my mind is, which is aberration? The dramas that happened in our parliament an aberration, or what followed in Vienna and New York an aberration? So I think we will have to wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your well-researched presentation. Well, we're looking for answers, but you ask questions. Unfortunate. I'll leave that to Mr. Sandeep Kumar, whether to respond or not to respond. He has the right to respond to that. But some of the questions that you raised are actually, the answers are self-explanatory, do not require a response. Now, may I request Professor Pasha to make, and I would expect from the last speaker, to make some positive, in the sense that some usable policy options, if you can suggest, that will be useful for the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to live up to your expectations. But before that, we need to keep in mind the ground reality in West Asia. If we have to really come up with realistic policy options, or what are the areas we can retrieve and work upon them, so on and so forth. At the outset, I must mention the Israeli invasion of Gaza and our policy gives a clue to what is going to come in the future. And there are elements of continuity, which I'm sure is not only because of our very experienced diplomats and the untiring work done by the MEA, which is closer to the ground reality there, and also keeping in mind the shifting sands, the caravans which are moving, demolishing borders, and the outsiders waiting desperately to fish in troubled waters. Let us see 3-4 areas. The first statement I came across from the new government was that this unstable area is prone for unlimited problems, perennial turmoil, oil shocks, not one but at least half a dozen, from 73, 79, Iran-Iraq war, Kuwait crisis, Iran sanctions, US invasion of Iraq, sanctions on Iran. All of these have affected us, like the rest of the world, of course, but we in particular had to sometimes go with limited oil supplies, very high oil prices. So the oil shocks, of course, compels any government which is dependent, any country which is dependent to the extent of 60, 65 and growing imports, to look for diversification. And I have been hearing this word for more than 2-3 decades, that we need to scout for new sources away from the Gulf. But the more we do, the more we have become dependent on the Gulf. This is the irony of the situation, because of cost, because of long-term contracts, because of insurance, various other factors. And I don't see anything positive as far as our reliance on the Gulf hydrocarbons is concerned, oil and gas. That will continue to remain a permanent feature of our policy in this region, irrespective of our search for Sakhalin, for Nigeria, Venezuela, the whole world around which ONGC Videsh is spending billions of dollars. Number 2, equidistance. our policy of support to the Palestinian cause, before Israel was established and after, I think has been a major initiative, apart from decolonization, which has stood the test of time. Even after the establishment of diplomatic relations with Israel in 1992, we remain consistent. Although one may question the degree of support, whether it was verbal or diplomatic or less material, so on and so forth. But we have been consistent, and if not the leaders, the people in this region see a continuation of our stand, the morally correct position to speak for the Palestinians who have suffered and who continue to suffer at the hands of not only Israel but the powers behind Israel. And one should also remember our support to Egypt, Nasser, non-aligned country, during the Suez crisis. I have served for the Government of India, for the MEA in Egypt for 3+ years. What I found was every Egyptian, old, young, and a small child, still recalls India's support to Egypt during the Suez crisis. Not to speak of the thousands of Egyptians who studied and got degrees from India, who are there to welcome for any program in any part of Egypt. From Fakous in the Delta to Tur and to Wadi Gadid or to Baghdad, the old slave route. That remains consistent. And I found that from governors to students. And this support to people, I think, is what is expected from a great democracy like India. For most people in this region, India is a shining example of what a country which got independence from imperialism, colonialism, has established the form of government very dear to most people in this region. And the Arab Spring was nothing about their desire to have responsible government, respect for human rights, an end to emergency rule, authoritarian structures, and the sheer domination of the mukhabarat and the police security apparatus which humiliates them. In fact, many people in this region are confused, whether in Bahrain or Yemen or in Libya or in Syria, where actually we stand. Whether we are with the so-called secularist Bashar al-Assad or the various other upheavals which have shaken it. And my own prescription is that in the long run, we must be with the people of this region. And that is what it endures. The emirs, the sultans, the sheikhs, the dictators will come and go. But what remains is our commitment to the people, their aspirations, and their desire to be treated as equal citizens. In the monarchies, it is the ruler and the petitioner, because they claim they were the creators of these states. So the ruling family cannot be equal to the common man. And you know the implications of this from a democratic point of view. The third one, rising extremism. This is a fact, particularly after 67 war, 79 Iranian revolution, and the breakdown of the governance structures. Uniformly, whether they are monarchies or republics. And this extremism we have seen in the shape of caliphate. It has not come all of a sudden. For many of us who have been watching the developments there, it was in the making for quite some time. Because what one has seen in the name of religion being dished out is just the opposite. If one considers or studies the ruling families in the Gulf, what they claim to be doing in the region, within the countries, and what they do outside in Europe, which brings dishonor to the religion and to the people they represent, is widely known to all of us. So what these groups, which are branded as extremists, what most countries, most Arabs look at them as articulating some of their desires, expectations. It is for no good reason that many Arabs, especially the Sunnis, look upon the IS in some positive way, in some sections. Whether it is the Shamar tribe straddling the borders of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, which was very arbitrarily divided by the British and separated very cruelly, or the Sunnis who have ruled Baghdad for centuries until the Americans handed over to another group, which carried out a virtual vendetta. And now, having fractured Iraq for the last 12 years or so, they want to inflict more pain and agony on the people. You bomb them. You destroy whatever little is left. Like exactly they did in Afghanistan. They used the Afghans to bring about an end of the Soviet Union. And then when the Taliban came, you destroyed their mud houses. So with the result, millions of Afghans had to flee. And this is exactly what is happening. Support to the most extremist groups by the West, because you have a pattern of Western agenda, not just through the Sykes-Picot Agreement during the First World War, but it's a very old agenda, the encroachments the British, French, Spanish made to the Ottoman Empire. Fourth, Mr. Chairman, the present government here has two important items on their agenda. One is the abrogation of the Article 370 in the Constitution, which gives special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They have made a promise. I am sure they would like to adhere to this promise. Look at the implications of this. Since 1947, almost all prime ministers until Vajpayee worked very hard to remove the Kashmir issue from being an international agenda. Tirelessly worked to neutralize Pakistan's attempt to mobilize the Muslim countries through the OIC, through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, Morocco, the Shah's Iran, so on and so forth. Ultimately, all, I'm saying all, OIC members consistently have been supporting our point of view, that is the Simla Agreement, that Kashmir is a bilateral issue, it has to be negotiated between the two countries. Now, if the article is abrogated, you have a completely new situation arising, going back to 1947. Whether it is the National Conference, or the PDP, or involvement of Pakistan, or taking back again to the OIC, fact-finding missions, human rights commission, so on and so forth. And here, West Asia becomes important because of the sheer number of countries which are involved. Number two, The issue of Muslims was mentioned by the Joint Secretary 1 of the MEA. Yes, Muslims are the third largest group concentrated in any part of the world in India. They are important. There is no doubt about that. Well, we can debate that, the numbers. So you have a situation now where the present government and its previous avatar, Johnson, wanted the best of relations with Israel, right from the Nehru days. The 77 Janata experience, we know. Vajpayee was the foreign minister. They received secretly Moshe Dayan, who wanted establishment of diplomatic relations. But he knew the compulsions of the coalition government, Morarji Desai. He could not go beyond. And Vajpayee had to respect the continuity of the previous government's policies towards this region. Then the NDA, 1999 to 2004, they didn't have a majority. They had to have a coalition and there were constraints. But still, there was a difference. Ariel Sharon was invited by that government as the Israeli Prime Minister. Soon after the devastation Israel visited on Gaza. Soon after the Gujarat riots, in which the present Prime Minister has been accused of various wrongdoings. So now that the government has overwhelming majority in the Lok Sabha, in the lower house, and the open articulation by many of its members, but we wish to have the closest of relations with Israel. Fair enough. Nobody is disputing that. Israel is a very important arms supplier. It is an important country where some of the technology which is not available here or elsewhere we might get. So far so good. But the real problem comes on the issue of cooperation on terrorism, on security. As we all know, the Jews were tormented for nearly 2000 years in Europe by the Christians, by all European countries, from Russia to Spain, from Sweden to Italy. They were hounded out from place to place. They lived in ghettos. And the Europeans, through the British, to solve their European problem, they brought this Balfour Declaration and the Jewish state was established. And this Arab-Israeli problem is purely a problem created by British imperialism. To cut the historical development short, the agenda of some of these groups which seek inspiration from the BJP, whether it is love jihad or polarization for votes, or the VHP's agenda of reconversion of crores of people, so on and so forth. This also has implications for our policy in this region. The chairman, Mr. Chairman wants me to focus on what do we need to do in West Asia. Yes, I was coming to that, Mr. Chairman. If you can give me a few minutes, I will run through the points I have noted down. The first point I have noted down is there are innumerable old problems. And from these old problems, new challenges are emerging. That is what we have to focus. So far, these problems were manipulated, sustained by the Western countries. And as I said, this has led to innumerable challenges to us, whether it is in the energy sector or firefighting in this region, so on and so forth. And this calls for India's engagements to be multiplied. We cannot remain a bystander, that we have good relations with 25 countries, from Iran, Turkey, Israel to all the Arab countries. Because the region has become highly polarized, not only on the basis of pro-Western monarchies or sectarian basis or pro-democracy or extremists. It's getting sharper and sharper. And the West, obviously, they have a vested interest in fanning these, sustaining these, widening and deepening these differences, which will definitely impact us. And one thing from all of these which is emerging is the religious groups in all countries, whether it is the renewed interest of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin from Egypt to Libya to Yemen to Hamas or Jordan or everywhere. You have more extreme groups emerging. And this will continue as long as the interference and foreign intervention continues. The second is the skewed distribution of resources, rich and the poor Arab countries. All Egyptian rulers, presidents, have aspired to a greater role. They withdrew from the armed confrontation with Israel. One of the key factors was the cost. Egypt was expected to bear the cost to sustain this war. The Gulf countries would live in the luxury of their petrodollars. Sadat withdrew from this. They said, no, you cannot fight the battle to the last Egyptian. We will decide. He opted out. Keeping in view all of these, I think we have to take sides on certain key issues if we have to safeguard our interest in this region. One, I would suggest is the emerging bloc, that is the BRICS. Because from the conflict in Syria, from the conflict in Iraq and other hotspots, there is this broad convergence of interest between Russia, China, India, South Africa and Brazil. It's for no good reason that 6 Latin American ambassadors were withdrawn during the recent Gaza thing, including very strident statements from South Africa. Russia and China also took very different stands. And we also, externally, we have taken a different stand on the Gaza. So there, and on the economic issues, there is this possibility that India and the BRICS, other partners in the BRICS, can and should explore an alternative way of conflict resolution in this region. To start with the smaller ones, and maybe that will give hope to tackle or attempt to tackle the older problem like the Arab-Israel issues. The third one is, somebody talked about the leverage, whether we have or we haven't. I personally feel we have, but we don't want to recognize that. Our 6 million plus Indian workers, I feel they are a very important leverage. Many may dismiss that if Indians are not there, Egyptians may come, Yemenis may come, Sri Lankans may come. No, my reading is that Indians are bound to be preferred for a variety of reasons. In fact, the number is increasing. Slowly but surely, I think we have to look into this factor, because it is getting linked also with domestic peace, security and stability within India. Whether it is the Chief Minister of Kerala camping here for the release of 40 plus nurses, or the Kerala MPs sitting on hunger strike during 1991 Kuwait crisis to get the Malayalis out of this crisis from Kuwait. And this may multiply for other states and from other countries. So in that way, we have to look into this aspect. I take the J.S. Vana's point about the issue of evacuation. We have some assets, but we also need to partner with regional countries in a much more robust way, how we can in emergencies evacuate such a large number of people, not necessarily from all the countries at the same time, but even if it involves, say, UAE. The issue during the Babri Masjid led to riots in Dubai and Al Ain. About 5,000 Indians and Pakistanis were expelled by the UAE authorities. Even to this day, they have maintained the record. They will not allow any of them to return to Kuwait for any work permit. They are very strict about that. How peace and security in these countries is taken seriously also needs to be kept in mind. So the last point, Mr. Chairman, given the complexity of the region, the desire of almost all major powers to have their presence, whether it is trade or arms supply or contacts or Hajj or cultural contacts, we need to have more specialists in India. I can count a handful of universities in India. Less than 6 places in India specialize on this region. And less than 20 specialists are available. Sometimes it's very difficult to devote your time for teaching, research, TV, electronic media, print media. You have to juggle, find time. So I think we need to have more centers which should study this region much more carefully, intensively, and the UGC, I think, should come into the picture with MHRD for financing. To end my presentation, I would emphasize that there are 2 things. The Indo-Israeli intelligence security cooperation, I don't think there is any doubt about that. We are a huge nation. We wish to maintain our secular democratic framework, and the extremist groups which are emerging in this region, we need to keep track of them. But it would be wrong on our part to adopt Israeli methods to tackle this. Because what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, we all know how questionable they are, whether they are successful in controlling the Palestinians, either in West Bank or Gaza, and how isolated Israel has become because of these policies which John Kerry termed as apartheid. Whether for a secular democratic, liberal democratic country like India, we can imbibe those techniques to contain the threat posed within India. Because the results show a very disastrous policy as far as Israel is concerned. So I don't think the Israeli example is particularly useful, because that will only alienate the minorities and others who are being targeted. And this calls us to keep our house in order, as Atal Bihari Vajpayee, our former Prime Minister, pointed out. Unless we keep our house in order, we will not be able to raise our heads and safeguard our esteem outside the world. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Professor Pasha. Just to lighten up the mood a little, while participating in a war game in NDC, when I was doing the NDC, they called for a senior media person to advise those who were holding various appointments in that exercise. And I was holding the appointment of General Musharraf. It was an India-Pakistan situation. And this gentleman comes and first thing he tells me is that irrespective of the question asked, you convey your message through this media. So sometimes we forget as to what the question is, and we convey a message. Notwithstanding that, let me just clarify 2-3 things with my limited knowledge. Article 370 is an internal issue for India. What it does with it, how it tackles with it, people may have their opinion, but it is India's sovereign right to decide what to do with it, democratically, politically. And if religion is an issue with the region, then I don't think BRICS has any chance of success, because Russia is not considered to be, in many eyes, the religion has a problem in Russia, or Russia has a problem with religion. China, the same. So I don't think BRICS stand a chance to replace United States or any other this thing. As far as OIC is concerned, with great regard to an organization which has a large number of members, I don't think OIC has passed a laudatory reference about handling of situation in Kashmir by India ever. Most of the time it's a standard anodyne kind of a resolution which we ignore because we know that they have no locus standi in the matter. So this is just to clarify the issue. As far as taking lessons from Israelis as to how to handle our problems of transnational jihadis and the like, I think the kind of tolerance that India has shown and the kind of maturity with which it has handled the situations within the country, I don't think have parallel anywhere in the world. We haven't learned from Israelis, Israelis might learn from us. Second, as far as criticism of Israel is concerned, I don't think that is our only obligation, or obligation only of India. You see what happened in Gaza today, and what was the reaction from the Arab League? I mean, after how many days did a question of criticism from there came? So I suppose we should not get swayed by ideological this thing, and I personally not ready to take on extra obligations which are not required by us. The obligations which are ours as a responsible nation, we should, but not on ideological grounds, not forgetting our interests at all. Because I haven't seen any country in the world which does not take decisions, be it foreign policy related or security related, which are not rooted in the national interests of that country itself. And I don't think we can be an exception there. Now, let me just say a few points. I expected a little more number of points, but maybe that will ask the audience to really come out with ideas rather than making comments which are not adding to ideas. One is that India was generally closer to the countries which were considered secular and had more pan-Arabic kind of approach, be it Egypt, be it Iraq, be it Syria. That was natural. Part of it was ideological, because of the ideological divide that was there, part of it was Cold War, but also because of our association with NAM, some people were more closer to us and not. Now, our participation, particularly in the security matters within the region, is absolutely, for that to happen, it's absolutely necessary that there is a consensus within the region. Because to get involved in intra-regional resources, I don't think we have the capability, nor will our interests be ever served by taking sides. We have multi-vector interests, multifarious interests with all the countries, And we are dealing with that on a bilateral level. So getting involved in a security situation to resolve a problem, unless there is a consensus within the region, I don't think is a wise, my personal opinion, I don't think is a very wise opinion. This rentier state tendency, somebody mentioned yesterday, is an anathema to India. I don't think India will be very comfortable with that. This is my understanding again. Then, as far as the terrorists coming back from West Asia, either they be a few Indians who are reported to there or anybody else, I don't think we'll find a very sort of welcoming environment within India. They will not be. And so we are with every country that suffers from terrorism. And I think India has been taking quite a lot of lot of attention in getting involved with, be it intelligence sharing, the extradition of people, etc., etc. India, I don't think, also has any desire to combine with any other set of countries or group of countries to shape the region or to manage the region in that manner. I think how this region evolves, how this region develops, how it comes out of its problems is primarily the responsibility of the countries of the region itself. And we are there to help in whatever manner they want us to help, without causing problems to our relationship with another country in the region. I think there is a scope, like the Minister of State for External Affairs also said yesterday, that we can talk to everybody in creating a common understanding about the consequences of divisive politics, about the consequences of terrorism, etc. We can also help if two sides agree to bring them together in their understanding of the issues that divide them. We can do that. He used the word mediation, but I think that's a little higher level of engagement. We can reach there sometimes, yes, provided the parties to the conflict want us to do that. We can also provide security for common challenges like anti-piracy, anti-terrorism, anti-narco-terrorism, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, for example. These are things that we are always ready to do. And I don't think any government in India will have any problem with that kind of a thing. We've had a security relationship in the past. We used to have an Air Force training team in Iraq. We have good defense cooperation agreements, particularly with Oman, Qatar, UAE now. And I think those kind of agreements which involve training of people in each other's academies and training schools, port calls by ships, joint exercises, sharing of equipment, sharing of concepts, doctrines, strategies, those kinds of things, I think India has always been open, and India can do that with any country of the region. There is no problem at all. There can be joint multinational military exercises. There can be a cooperation in space and cyber security areas. I think these are the areas which are so far unexplored, but I think we can go ahead and do this kind of a thing. And if by invitation, if the terrorists become too strong in a particular place, and invitation of the government under certain circumstances, I think India going forward would be ready to assist a legitimate government of any of the countries if there is a requirement of that side. But India will still need to, as in the present situation, will still need to discuss it with the regional countries, with other important countries in the world before it plunges headlong into any conflictual situation. This is my personal understanding.